Jake Martinez had been cleaning Orbital Station Nexus 7 for 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Not that he was counting. Much doubt the night shift suited him fine, fewer people to dodge around, number bureaucrats cluttering up the corridors, and definitely no tourists gawking at the exotic human custodian like he was some kind of zoo exhibit. Just Jake, his cleaning cart, and the quiet hum of life support systems keeping 40,000 beings breathing in the vacuum of space. Most nights, the routine was the same. Start in the residential sectors, work through the commercial districts, finish up in the administrative levels. The fancy folks up in the command sections never saw him coming or going, which was exactly how Jake liked it. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant steady work and a paycheck that kept him fed and housed. Tonight felt different, though Jake couldn't put his finger on what exactly was setting off his instincts. Instincts honed by 20 years of keeping. His head down and his mouth shut in places where asking the wrong questions could get you spaced. But something was definitely wrong in the upper administrative levels. For one thing, there were voices coming from conference room Alpha 7. That room was supposed to be sealed for routine maintenance, had been for the past 3 weeks. Jake should know he'd been the one filing the requisition forms to get the environmental systems updated. For another thing, the voices weren't speaking Galactic Standard, or any of the dozen trade languages Jake had picked up over the years. They were speaking something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, something that sounded less like communication, and more like, well, like the noise his grandmother's old radiator used to make right before it exploded. Jake had learned long ago that the best way to stay out of trouble was to pretend he hadn't noticed anything unusual. Clean around the problem, file it away in the back of his mind, and focus on doing his job. But as he pushed his cart past the supposedly sealed conference room, one of the voices rose to what could only be described as panic. Containment is failing. Cannot allow discovery. Eliminate all evidence. Jake's blood turned to ice water. In his experience, when powerful people started talking about eliminating evidence, it usually meant eliminating witnesses. 2. He was trying to decide whether to quietly back away or just abandon his cart and run, when the conference room door suddenly hissed open. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit mixed with industrial coolant. The second thing was the sight of Commander Valeth, the station's second in command, standing in the doorway with an expression that could have frozen plasma. Commander Valeth was a Zephyrian, all graceful limbs and translucent blue skin that usually glowed with soft bioluminescence. Right now, her skin was pulsing with harsh reds and oranges that Jake was pretty sure meant either extreme anger or mortal terror. "You," she said, her voice carrying the musical harmonics that made Zephyrian speech sound like wind chimes in a storm. "What are you doing here?" Jake's mouth went dry, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "Evening cleaning rotation, ma'am. Same as always. This section is sealed for maintenance." "Yes, ma'am. I'm just cleaning around the sealed areas. Regulations say I still need to maintain the corridors and common spaces," which was true mostly. Jake had learned that the best lies were built on solid foundations of bureaucratic procedure. Nobody, not even suspicious alien commanders, wanted to argue about regulations at 3 in the morning. Commander Valeth studied him for a long moment, her skin cycling through colors Jake didn't recognize. Behind her, he could see movement in the conference room shapes that didn't quite look right, shadows that seemed to move independently of anything casting them. "You have heard nothing," she said finally. "No, ma'am. I never hear nothing on the night shift. Too quiet up here." Another long pause. Then Valeth stepped back into the conference room and sealed the door behind her. Jake stood there for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the resumed conversation from inside the room. The panic in the voices was getting worse, and he was starting to catch fragments that made his skin crawl, spreading faster than projected. Biological contamination. Quarantine the entire sector. That's when Jake noticed the smell wasn't coming from the conference room. It was coming from the ventilation system, and it was getting stronger. Jake had spent enough time maintaining environmental systems to know that when something that smelled like rotting fruit started pumping through the air recyclers, you had a problem, a big problem. The kind of problem that could kill everyone on the station if it wasn't dealt with quickly. He also knew that whatever was happening in Conference Room Alpha 7, the people inside weren't going to do anything about it. They were too busy covering their asses to worry about 40,000 innocent beings breathing contaminated air. Jake looked at his cleaning cart, loaded with industrial solvents, disinfectants, and maintenance tools. Then he looked at the ventilation. Great 20 meters down the corridor, where the sweet sick smell was definitely strongest. He'd been invisible for 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Maybe it was time to be seen. The thing about being a janitor on a space station was that you learned the places nobody else bothered to look. The maintenance shafts that connected different sections, the service corridors that ran behind the fancy offices, the environmental monitoring stations tucked away in corners, where only engineers and custodial staff ever went, had memorized every one of them. 20 minutes after his encounter with Commander Valeth, Jake was 3 levels up in 2 sections. Over, crammed into a maintenance shaft with his emergency toolkit and a portable atmospheric analyzer he'd borrowed from the engineering supply closet. The readings were worse than he'd feared. Whatever was pumping through the ventilation system wasn't just contamination, it was actively toxic. The analyzer's display was showing concentrations of unknown organic compounds that would be fatal to most carbon-based life forms within hours of exposure, and the concentration was increasing. Jake traced the contamination back through the vent system, following the strongest readings through a maze of ducts and filters. What he found in Environmental Control Section C12 made him forget all about staying invisible. The containment unit was the size of a small room designed to hold hazardous biological samples for research purposes. According to the status display, it should have been empty. According to the thick, luminescent slime coating the inside surfaces and seeping through the supposedly impermeable seals, it very definitely was not empty. Jake stared at the containment unit for a full minute, processing what he was seeing. Then he pulled out his cum unit and started recording everything. Asterisk, the slime wasn't just toxic, it was alive and growing. Jake could see it spreading across the containment surfaces in real time, testing the seals with what looked disturbingly like intelligence. Every few seconds, a tendril would probe at a joint or a connection, as if looking for the weakest point to exploit. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the smaller containment units stacked around the main chamber. Dozens of them, each labeled with location codes Jake recognized. Residential sections, commercial districts, the fucking water treatment facility. Someone had been deliberately introducing this stuff into the station's infrastructure. And based on the dates on the labels, it had been going on for weeks. Jake was still recording when his cum unit chimed with an incoming message. For a split second, he hoped it might be his supervisor wondering where he was. Instead, it was a station-wide alert. Attention all residents. Due to a minor environmental anomaly, sections C through F are being placed under temporary quarantine. This is a precautionary measure only. Please remain in your current locations until further notice. Jake checked his location. Environmental Control Section C12 was right in the middle of the quarantine zone. His cum unit chimed again. This time, it was a personal message from Commander Valeth. Mr. Martinez, please report to Security Station 7 for routine questioning regarding tonight's cleaning activities. This is not optional. Jake looked at the containment units, then at his cum unit, and at the ventilation shaft he'd crawled through to get here. He thought about 40,000 people breathing poison while a handful of conspirators in a conference room figured out how to cover their tracks. Then he did something he'd never done in 6 years. 3 months and 14 days of keeping his head down and staying invisible. He ignored the order and kept working. The first thing Jake needed was evidence. Not just the shaky footage from his cum unit, but hard data that couldn't be dismissed or buried. The kind of evidence that would be impossible to ignore, even for people who were very motivated to look the other way. The second thing he needed was a way to get that evidence to someone who could actually do something with it. The third thing he needed was to not get killed in the process. Jake spent the next hour documenting everything he could find in Environmental Control Section C12. Contamination readings, contaminated samples, maintenance logs that showed a pattern of routine inspections that corresponded exactly with the spread of whatever was eating through the station's life support systems. But the more he dug, the more questions he had. The biological agent Jake was calling it slime because he didn't know what else to call was clearly artificial. Nothing in nature was that perfectly adapted to breaking down the specific polymers used in station construction. Someone had engineered this stuff, and they'd done it specifically to target orbital station Nexus 7. But why? The station wasn't military, wasn't strategically important, wasn't anything except a minor trading post and refueling depot. What could anyone possibly gain by destroying it? Jake was copying the contamination data to a secure storage device when he heard voices in the corridor outside Environmental Control Section 112. Not the panicked alien languages from the conference room, but galactic standards spoken with the crisp efficiency of station security. Sealed the entire section. Orders are to locate and detain the human custodian. Commander says he may have been exposed to hazardous materials. Jake very carefully did not laugh at the irony. He'd definitely been exposed to hazardous materials, but not in the way they meant that the voices were getting closer. Jake pocketed his storage device, grabbed his emergency toolkit, and headed for the maintenance shaft. But as he reached the entrance, he heard something that made him freeze. "Sir, we've got a problem. The contamination readings in Section F just spiked. We're looking at a complete environmental failure within the next 6 hours. What about the evacuation protocols?" Commander Valeth has ordered all transport restricted pending investigation of the contamination source. No one gets on or off the station. Jake closed his eyes and tried not to think about what that meant. 40,000 people trapped on a station that was going to become unlivable in 6 hours. And the people who could authorize an evacuation were the same people who had caused the problem in the first place. He was still trying to process this when his cum unit chirped with another message. This one wasn't from Commander Valeth. "Jake, this is Elena Vasquez in Central Communications. I know you're probably busy with the quarantine situation, but I've got some weird readings from the cum array that I think you should see. Can you meet me in Relay Station 3? And Jake, don't use official channels to respond. Something's not right with the command network." Jake stared at the message. Elena was one of the few people on the station who'd ever treated him like a human being, instead of a piece of mobile furniture. She was also the kind of person who noticed when things didn't add up, which made her either the perfect ally or a very dangerous trap. But with security looking for him and the station slowly dying around them, Jake was running out of options. He sent back a single word: coming. Then he crawled into the maintenance shaft and started moving toward Relay Station 3, carrying evidence of a conspiracy that could save 40,000 lives or get him killed, possibly both. Relay Station 3 was one of the most isolated spots on Orbital Station Nexus 7, tucked away in the outer ring where the only visitors were maintenance crews and the occasional lost tourist. Jake had always liked it for its quiet, The perfect place to take a break from the endless chatter of station life and just listen to the subtle vibrations of the station's rotation. Tonight, it felt like the most dangerous place in the galaxy. Elena Vasquez was waiting for him when he arrived. Her usually immaculate communications officer uniform, wrinkled and stained with what looked like coolant fluid. Her dark hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and her brown eyes held the kind of focused intensity Jake associated with people who just figured out they were in serious trouble. "Jake, thank God you're here. Look at this." She gestured to the communications console, which was displaying what looked like a normal traffic monitoring screen. But Jake had learned to pay attention to details, and the details were all wrong. "See these transmission logs?" Elena pointed to a series of data streams. For the past 3 weeks, someone's been routing communications through relay stations that shouldn't exist. Ghost networks, hidden channels, transmissions that don't show up in the official records. Jake studied the display. Communicating with who? That's what I've been trying to figure out. But Jake, whoever they are, they've been coordinating something big. Look at the timing. Elena pulled up another screen, showing the ghost transmissions plotted against a timeline. The pattern was clear, increasing frequency and intensity over the past 3 weeks, with a massive spike starting about 4 hours ago. Right around the time Jake had stumbled onto Commander Valeth's secret meeting. "Elena," Jake said slowly, "I need to show you something. But first, you need to understand that what I'm about to tell you could get us both killed." Elena looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Jake, I've been monitoring unauthorized transmissions for 3 weeks. I already know we're in trouble." Jake pulled out his storage device and connected it to Elena's console. "This is documentation of a biological contamination that's been deliberately introduced into the station's environmental systems. It's toxic, it's spreading, and based on what I overheard tonight, the people who did it are planning to eliminate all evidence." Elena's face went pale as she reviewed Jake's recordings. "My God, how long do we have?" "Based on security chatter I picked up, maybe 6 hours before environmental failure. And they've restricted all transport off the station. They're going to let everyone die to cover this up?" "Looks like it." Elena was quiet for a moment, staring at the contamination data. Then she did something Jake hadn't expected. She smiled. "Jake, you magnificent bastard. You've just given us exactly what we need to stop this." "Come again?" Elena turned back to her console and began typing rapidly. "Those ghost transmissions I've been tracking? They're not just coordinating the contamination, they're reporting on it. Whoever's behind this has been sending regular updates to someone off-station. Progress reports, contamination levels, population impact assessments." Jake felt a chill. "You're saying this is being directed from outside?" "I'm saying this whole thing is an experiment, and Station Nexus 7 is the lab rat. But here's the thing. About experiments, they generate data. And data can be intercepted, copied, and transmitted to people who weren't supposed to see it." Elena's fingers flew over the console, accessing communication networks Jake hadn't known existed. "I've been building a parallel communication system for the past month, ever since I noticed the ghost transmissions. Hidden relays, encrypted channels, direct links to Galactic Authority monitoring stations. You built a secret communication network." "Jake, I've been a communications officer for 15 years. Of course, I built a secret communication network. The only question was whether I'd ever need to use it." Jake watched Elena work, accessing files and transmission logs with the kind of focused intensity he usually associated with master craftsmen. Within minutes, she had assembled a comprehensive package: Sheik's contamination evidence, her transmission intercepts, and detailed analysis showing the coordination between the biological attack and the communications blackout. "This is everything. We need to prove what's happening here," Elena said. "But we need to get it to someone who can act on it fast enough to matter." "Who?" Elena smiled grimly. Commander Sarah Chun of the Galactic Authority patrol ship Intrepid. She's currently 3 hours out from Station Nexus 7, and she's been wondering why we've gone dark on our routine communications. Jake felt a flicker of hope. You can reach her? I can do better than that. I can give her everything she needs to declare an emergency intervention and override the station's command authority. Elena began uploading the evidence package to her hidden relay network. Jake, you've just helped save 40,000 lives. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing Relay Station 3 in red light. Jake's comm unit immediately chimed with multiple alerts, environmental warnings, security bulletins, and a station-wide announcement. Attention all residents. Due to accelerating environmental degradation, all personnel are ordered to report to designated emergency shelters. Compliance is mandatory. Security teams have been authorized to detain anyone found outside of designated safe areas. Elena cursed in 3 languages as her console flickered and died. They've cut primary power to the communications array. I've got maybe 10 minutes of backup power to finish the transmission. What do you need me to do? I need you to get to Environmental Control Section C12 and do something about that biological contamination. Even if Commander Chun gets here in time to take control of the station, it won't matter if the life support systems fail before she can organize an evacuation. Jake stared at Elena. I'm a janitor. I clean things. I don't know how to stop some kind of alien bioweapon. Jake, you've been cleaning this station for 6 years. You know every system, every connection, every weak point better than anyone. If there's a way to stop this contamination, or at least slow it down, you're the one who's going to find it. Elena turned back to her console, working frantically to complete the transmission as power levels continued to drop. I'll buy you as much time as I can. Get to Section C12 and do what you do best, clean up the mess. Jake looked at his cleaning cart, abandoned in the corridor outside Relay Station 3. Industrial solvents, disinfectants, and maintenance tools. The same equipment he'd used every night for 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days. Maybe it was time to find out what a human janitor could really accomplish when the stakes were high enough. Getting back to Environmental Control Section, C12 without being detected by station security required all of Jake's knowledge of the maintenance tunnels and service corridors. Fortunately, after 6 years of navigating the station's hidden spaces, Jake could move through the infrastructure like a ghost. The contamination had gotten worse. Much worse. What had been thick, luminescent slime coating the containment unit was now a spreading network of organic growth that covered most of Environmental Control Section 100-12. Tendrils of the stuff were probing at environmental control systems, working their way into air recycling units and water treatment connections. Jake stood in the doorway, breathing through an emergency filter mask and trying to think like the bioweapon apparently thought. It was spreading systematically, targeting the station's most vulnerable systems first. Life support, environmental controls, power distribution, everything needed to keep 40,000 people alive in space. But it was also making mistakes. Jake had spent 6 years cleaning up every kind of spill, contamination, and organic mess imaginable. He dealt with alien fungi that could eat through metal, bacterial cultures that turned carbon dioxide into acid, and cleaning challenges that would have stumped a team of xenobiologists. And in all that time, he'd learned one fundamental truth. Everything had a weakness. The bioweapon was designed to break down station infrastructure, but it was also organic, which meant it had metabolic requirements, chemical vulnerabilities, and environmental limits just like any other life form. Jake opened his toolkit and began mixing industrial solvents. The first combination, he tried ammonia-based degreaser, mixed with high pH cleaning compound, had no effect on the bioweapon. The second combination, acidic descaler, mixed with enzymatic, Cleaner actually seemed to make it grow faster. But the third combination made Jake smile for the first time. In hours, oxidizing bleach mixed with organic alcohol created a reaction that made the bioweapon recoil. Not just shrink back, actually retreat, pulling its tendrils away from treated surfaces like it had been burned. Jake methodically tested the mixture on different parts of the growth, noting which areas were most vulnerable and which seemed resistant. Within minutes, he had identified the bioweapon's weak point, the connections between individual organisms. The thing wasn't actually a single creature, it was a colony. And like most colonies, it relied on communication and coordination between individual units. The oxidizing alcohol mixture disrupted those connections, essentially severing the bioweapon's ability to coordinate its attack on station systems. Jake spent the next hour systematically treating the growth in Huanzi, Environmental Control Section C12, working from the most critical systems outward. It was slow, careful work. Too much of the mixture too fast could damage station equipment, but too little would only temporarily slow the bioweapon spread. But as he worked, Jake began to see the bigger picture. The bioweapon wasn't just attacking randomly. It was following specific patterns, targeting predetermined weak points in the station's infrastructure, which meant someone had done detailed reconnaissance before deploying it. Someone who knew exactly how Station Nexus 7 systems worked. Someone on the inside. Jake was documenting the bioweapon's attack patterns when his comm unit chimed with an encrypted message from Elena. Jake, good news and bad news. Good news. I got the evidence package transmitted to Commander Chun. She's declared an emergency intervention and is en route with a full hazmat team. Bad news. She's still 2 hours out, and I'm picking up chatter. That suggests the conspirators are accelerating their timeline. They know their plan is blown, and they're trying to complete the contamination before help arrives. Jake looked around Environmental Control Section C12. He'd managed to stop the bioweapon spread in this area, but that was just one small part of the station. If the conspirators were accelerating their timeline, they were probably activating contamination in areas he hadn't even found yet. Jake sent back a quick message. Need locations of all biological containment units on station. Official and unofficial. The response came back within minutes, along with a schematic that made Jake's blood run cold. There weren't just dozens of contamination points, there were hundreds, hidden throughout the station's infrastructure, timed to activate in sequence and create a cascading failure of all life support systems. But there was something else in Elena's message that gave Jake an idea. A very dangerous, very stupid, very human idea. Elena, can you access the station's environmental control network from your position? Limited access. Why? I need you to reroute all environmental processing through backup systems and put the main network on manual override. I'm going to try something crazy. Jake, whatever you're thinking, remember that we just need to buy time for Commander Chun to get here. Jake looked at his toolkit, then at the retreating bioweapon growth, then at the schematic showing hundreds of contamination points throughout the station. Elena, I'm a janitor. Cleaning up impossible messes is what I do for a living. Then Jake began mixing chemicals in quantities that would have horrified any safety inspector in the galaxy. The thing about being a janitor was that you learned to think about problems on a large scale, not just cleaning up individual messes, but understanding how contamination spread, how systems connected, and how to address root causes instead of just symptoms. Jake had been thinking small, treating individual contamination sites with targeted chemical applications. But as he looked at Alana's schematic, showing hundreds of attack points throughout the station, he realized he needed to think like the station's infrastructure, not like a person with a mop and bucket. Station Nexus 7's environmental systems were designed with multiple redundancies and interconnections. Air recycling, water treatment, waste processing, atmospheric regulation. They all shared common pathways and processing nodes, which meant that anything introduced into one system would eventually circulate through all of them. The conspirators had been using this interconnection to spread their bioweapon. Jake was going to use it to spread his cure. The plan was simultaneously simple and insane. Create a massive quantity of his oxidizing alcohol mixture and introduce it into the station's main environmental processing system. The treatment would circulate throughout the entire infrastructure, reaching every contamination point simultaneously and severing the bioweapon colony's ability to coordinate. It would also turn the station's entire atmosphere into a low-level chemical soup that might or might not be safe for human respiration. But it was better than letting 40,000 people die from bioweapon poisoning. Jake spent the next 30 minutes mixing industrial chemicals in quantities that would have required environmental permits on any civilized world. Oxidizing bleach, organic alcohol, stabilizing agents, and buffers designed to keep the mixture active, but not explosive. The hardest part was calculating the right concentrations. Too weak, and the mixture wouldn't be effective against the bioweapon. Too strong, and it would kill everyone on the station faster than the contamination would. Jake found himself thinking about his grandmother, who had run a small-town laundromat for 40 years and had never met a stain she couldn't remove. She'd taught him that every cleaning problem had a solution. You just had to understand the chemistry and be willing to experiment. Of course, Grandma Martinez had never had to decontaminate a space station while being hunted by alien conspirators. Elena, Jake transmitted as he prepared the final batch of his mixture. I need you to shut down all non-essential atmospheric processing and reroute everything through the main environmental hub. I'm going to introduce a cleaning agent that should neutralize the bioweapon, but it's going to affect the air quality throughout the station. Jake, are you sure about this? If you're wrong, if I'm wrong, we're all dead anyway. At least this way, we go out fighting. Jake connected his improvised chemical delivery system to the station's main environmental intake. It wasn't elegant, basically a jury-rigged pump system that would gradually introduce his mixture into the air recycling network over the course of an hour, but elegance wasn't the point. Results were. Jake activated the delivery system and watched as his mixture began flowing into the station's environmental network. Almost immediately, monitoring displays throughout Environmental Control Section C12 began showing changes in atmospheric composition. And something else. The bioweapon growth was reacting. The luminescent slime that had been spreading throughout the station's infrastructure was beginning to break apart, its individual colonies losing cohesion as Jake's oxidizing mixture disrupted their intercellular connections. What had been coordinated attack was becoming a chaotic mess of disconnected organisms that couldn't maintain their assault on station systems. Jake's comm unit chimed with updates from Elena. Jake, I'm seeing atmospheric changes throughout the station. Contamination readings are dropping in all sectors. Whatever you did, it's working. Good. How long until Commander Chon arrives? 45 minutes. But Jake, we've got another problem. Security forces are converging on Environmental Control Section C12. Commander, Valith must have figured out what you're doing. Jake looked at the chemical delivery system, which needed at least another 30 minutes to fully circulate his treatment throughout the station's infrastructure. If security shut down the system now, there would still be enough active bioweapon to complete the contamination. Elena, I need you to lock down Environmental Control Section C12 from the outside. Security protocols, maintenance lockdown, whatever you can do to buy me time to finish the job. Jake, if I lock you in there, you'll be trapped with no way out. Jake looked around Environmental Control Section C12 at the retreating bioweapon growth and the improvised chemical delivery system that was slowly saving 40,000 lives. He thought about 6 years, 3 months, and 14 days of being invisible, of keeping his head down and staying out of trouble. Elena, for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The security lockdown activated just as Jake heard voices in the corridor outside. Commander Valeth and her co-conspirators had arrived, but they were too late. The chemical treatment was already circulating throughout the station, neutralizing their bioweapon and saving the lives they'd been willing to sacrifice. Jake settled back against a wall to wait for Commander Chun's arrival, listening to the sound of the station's environmental systems working normally for the first time in weeks. He was still invisible to most people. But 40,000 lives were going to continue because one human janitor had refused to look the other way when something needed to be cleaned up. It was, Jake thought, the best day's work of his career. 3 months later, Jake Martinez stood in the main auditorium of Orbital Station Nexus 7, wearing a dress uniform that felt completely foreign, and wondering how he'd ended up in front of a crowd of dignitaries, reporters, and station residents. The Galactic Authority Cross for Civilian Heroism, Commander Sarah Chun announced, is presented to Jake Martinez in recognition of extraordinary courage and technical expertise in preventing the loss of 40,000 lives aboard Orbital Station Nexus 7. The applause was thunderous, but Jake barely heard it. He was too busy looking out at the crowd and seeing faces he recognized, residents whose lives he'd saved, co-workers who finally knew his name, aliens from dozens of species who had gathered to thank the human janitor who had refused to stay. Invisible when it mattered most, Elena Vasquez was in the front row, beaming with pride and wearing her own medal, the Galactic Authority Distinguished Service Award for her role in exposing the conspiracy and coordinating the rescue. Next to her sat Marcus Webb, Jake's new Deputy Chief of Environmental Services, still adjusting to the idea that his old cleaning partner was now running the department. Mr. Martinez, Commander Chun continued, your actions demonstrate that heroism comes not from special powers or advanced training, but from the willingness to act when action is needed, using whatever skills and resources are available. Jake accepted the medal and stepped forward to address the crowd. 6 months ago, the idea of speaking in public would have terrified him. Now, after everything he'd been through, it felt natural. I'm not a hero, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I'm just a guy who cleans things for a living. But I learned something important 3 months ago. Everybody's job matters, and everybody's contribution counts. You don't have to be a commander or a scientist or a diplomat to make a difference. Sometimes you just have to be willing to do what needs to be done, even when nobody's watching. Jake paused, looking out at the crowd, especially when nobody's watching. The investigation that followed had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Commander Valeth and 3 other station officials had been part of a black market research operation, using Station Nexus 7 as a testing ground for biological weapons intended for sale to the highest bidder. 40,000 residents had been expendable test subjects in an experiment designed to refine the bioweapon's effectiveness. All 4 conspirators were now serving life sentences in maximum security facilities. The bioweapon research had been turned over to Galactic Authority, scientists for development of countermeasures, and Station Nexus 7 had been completely overhauled with new environmental systems and enhanced security protocols. But the biggest change was in how people saw Jake Martinez. The invisible janitor had become the most visible person on the station. Residents stopped him in corridors to thank him. New employees asked for his autograph. Children from a dozen different species drew pictures of him, cleaning up bioweapons with a mop and bucket. Jake had turned down offers to transfer to prestigious positions on other stations, declined interviews with galactic media, and politely refused suggestions that he write a book about his experiences. He was content to remain on Station Nexus 7, doing the work he'd always done, just with a better title and the resources to do it properly. "The thing is," Jake said to Elena over coffee in the station's main cafeteria, "nothing really changed. I'm still cleaning up messes. I'm still paying attention to details that other people miss. I'm still making sure everything works the way it's supposed to." Elena smiled. "Except now people notice." "Yeah, that's taking some getting used to." Jake looked around the cafeteria, noting the easy interaction between species, the relaxed atmosphere, the sense of community that had emerged in the aftermath of the crisis. It was, he realized, exactly the kind of environment he'd always wanted to work in, a place where everyone contributed, where differences were respected, and where problems were solved through cooperation rather than conspiracy. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think we would have figured it out if I hadn't stumbled onto that meeting?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, probably not in time. The conspiracy was too well planned, too carefully hidden. It took someone with your specific combination of access, skills, and willingness to act to uncover it. So it really was luck." "No, Jake. Luck was you being in the right place at the right time. Everything else, recognizing the problem, gathering evidence, developing a solution, implementing it under pressure. It was skill, determination, and courage." Jake nodded, accepting the assessment. He'd spent so much of his life feeling insignificant, invisible, unimportant. It was still hard to believe that his ordinary skills and knowledge had been exactly what was needed in an extraordinary situation. But maybe, Jake thought, that was the point. Heroes weren't special people with unique abilities. Heroes were ordinary people who chose to act when action was needed, using whatever skills they had to make things better. Jake Martinez, Environmental Services Chief of Orbital Station Nexus 7, finished his coffee and headed back to work. There were messes to clean up, systems to maintain, and 40,000 lives depending on him to keep everything running smoothly. It was exactly the job he'd always wanted.